Today's daf we're going to be learning is Bava Metzia daf Tzadibet. Today's daf is sponsored by the Hadran women of Long Island in honor of the birth of a granddaughter to our friend and co-learner Tzippi Wolkenfeld, born to her children Hannah and Jacob Finkel. May the new princess grow the Torah, the Chupah, the Masim Tovim, and may the joy of her arrival be a harbinger of smachot for all. Okay, we're going to get started with the top of our daf. B'chamor kashihi poreket. If you remember, our Mishnah was talking about when the workers are only allowed to eat while they're on the job. But in between, they're not really allowed to. But we let them because otherwise they're going to waste their work time. And then it added this line that the chamor, that also when it comes to animals, can eat while they're taking the load off the donkey. So something that doesn't make so much sense about this, which is kishi poreket mehecha nachla. If they're taking off the load, how is the animal eating? So there's two ways to, or maybe more than two ways to understand this question. But normally we assume the animal's eating by turning the head around and eating the food from on their back. Now, if you're pulling it off, there's no way the animal could actually be eating at that time. Or alternatively, Rashi says, it takes about a second to take it off. So how are they're going to have time to eat while you do this action that takes all of about a minute or 20 seconds. So the Gemara answers, Ema, change it to ad shetehe porka. The animal, until it takes it off, that's when the animal can eat. And in fact, Taninu lahad Tana Rabbanan, we have a bright that supports this reading of our Mishnah. Chamor v'gamal ochlimi masoy shal gabem. Okay, a camel and a donkey, they can eat from what's on their backs. Ubavad shelo yito biyado v'yachilem. As long as the owner doesn't physically take the food and put it in front of the animal, but while the animal's walking, as I mentioned before, right, while the animal's involved in carrying this, the animal can turn their head, eat off their backs, and continue, on their way. So that we permit. Again, that's while they're right, and that basically means we're not really wasting the time of the owner, that they're going to do it, at a time. Well, I guess the truth is it's a little bit strange because this is actually on the job, but we somehow allow this anyway, right? Maybe the truth is it could be this line is really referring back to the beginning of kulam lo amru ela b'shat melacha. Maybe this is defining the shat melacha, not the exception to the rule. Okay, new Mishnah. Ochel poel kishut afilu b'dinar. A worker can eat. Kishut is from the kishuim family, which is zucchini. Some people translate it as cucumbers. Okay, whatever it is, we're going to see it's something expensive. They can eat something more expensive, even if it's b'dinar. Even if it's for the value of a dinar, you can still eat it. Okay, if you're picking expensive food, you're allowed to eat that item. Kotevet afilu b'dinar. And if it's dates, which are also expensive, you can eat even, the value of a dinar. Meaning, it doesn't seem like there's a limit on what you can eat and how much you can eat even. Rabbi Elazar Chasama Omil, he disagrees with Tana and says, Lo yuchal poel yater al scharo, which seems to say that the rabbis think you can. What he says is, if you're making $100, you can only eat up to $100. In other words, now, even though this is in addition to your salary, right? Your salary includes the way, you might have a salary and there's certain benefits, or, you might work at a job where there's food and they give out food, right? So let's say you're a very hungry person, you eat a ton. Are you allowed to eat as much food as you want, right? Is there a limit? So they say, Rabbi Elazar limits you. Rabbi Elazar Chasama says, it's interesting, his name is Chassam, like lachsom, like to block. Maybe this is where he gets his name. Some people got their names from these things. That he says there's a limit, okay? We're going to stop you when you get to $100 worth. If you're making only $100, then you can't eat more than $100 worth. The chachamim mitirim. The rabbis permit this. But the rabbis say, no, it's fine. Now we have a bit of an issue. What's our issue? Well, our issue is that Tana seems to say you can eat whatever you want, even if it's expensive, seemingly, even if it's more than your salary. Then Rabbi Elazar Chasama said, no. And then Chachamim say yes. So don't the Chachamim say the same thing as Tana? That's going to be our first section for today to figure that out. What's their debate? In addition, Chachamim add the following thing. However, even though it's permitted for you to eat as much as you want, even more than your salary, we teach people not to do this. You shouldn't be ravenous and come to the job starving and eat a ton, because you're going to basically, it's actually a funny language. What it means is you're going to close off an entranceway in front of you, meaning no one's going to want to hire you. But it's also funny because you're closing your mouth, right? By closing your mouth, you're actually opening up possibilities. By opening your mouth, you're closing possibilities. Okay, so now the Gemara comes and says, Chachamim hainu Tanakama, the rabbis say the same thing as Tanakama, and it's listed as if there's three separate opinions. How do we deal with this? The Gemara is going to suggest three possibilities of what the difference is. The first one is pretty simple. Ika benayu aval melamdim. L'Tanakama leilu melamdim, l'Rabbanan ilu melamdim. The rabbis say, eat what you want, eat your heart's content. Don't worry about the future and that you'll lose job possibilities because you're known to eat a lot of food on the job and it won't pay for people to hire you. No, rabbis say, eat whatever you want. And Tanakama says, and the rabbis say, no, you can technically eat what you want, but you should be aware because you might be closing off possibilities for yourself for the future. Ibaitema, second option. Ika benayu de Rav Asi. Machloket is, do they hold by what the statement of Rav Asi is or do they not? To Amar Rav Asi, again, we always do this. They're Tanaim, Rav Asi is later than them, but what it means is, was their opinion based on something that we see Rav Asi kind of gave wording to it later, but that's really what they were debating earlier. Rav Asi said, if you were hired to pick one bunch of grapes, you can actually eat that bunch of grapes. And that's the machloka between Tanakama and Chachamim. Can you eat that bunch of grapes or can't you? Who says what is a good question? There's a debate about it as often in these cases because it's not really clear that that's what they were talking about, not really clear that's what their debate is. Rashi says that Tanakama holds, if you look in Elul of Torah Eshkol Achavo Tanakama, okay, Lo Torah Eshkol, you're going to eat that entire bunch. Tanakama eat le de Rav Asi. Tanakama says, yes, you can eat it kishut, even if that's all you were asked to pick, and even if it's worth a lot of money, you can eat it, no problem. Okay, if you were asked to pick one zucchini, or one cucumber, since you're on the job, and that's all there is to eat, so yes, you can eat it. And then Chachamim, who say mitirim, well, they only allow it if there's other things. Okay, again, it's not clear really who says what, because neither of them really address that question directly in their words. So, it's up for grabs which way we go on it. Now we're going to point out something else Rav Asi said, and then we're going to say, why did he need to say both statements? They kind of both say one and the same, although they don't. But the question is, why we couldn't have learned one from the other, really. Not that they were both one and the same. Theoretically, you could have thought if it said one, you wouldn't have known the other. But Amar Rav Asi, afilu lo batzal ela eshkol echad ochlo. Even if you haven't yet taken, when you're on the job and you start your job at 9 o'clock in the morning, you're going to work till 5 o'clock in the afternoon. When you start the job and you pick that one, maybe in agriculture, you start at 5 in the morning, but you start early in the morning, you eat immediately before you even put anything. Remember the whole thing that said, El kalyecha lo tigain, don't put in your vessels, but you're basically putting in the balabayit's vessels. Well, you can eat it immediately. You can eat before you even start, before you even manage to put one in the basket. So now the question is, we're now sidetracking because we mentioned Rav Asi as perhaps this is the machloka between the two. And now we're just discussing why Rav Asi made these two statements. Utsricha, why did you need them both? If you only had the first one, you would say, Mishum de lo ika lemetav lekil yosha balabayit. Well, maybe you'd say, in this case, you're allowed to eat because there anyway is nothing you can put in the balabayit's kli, because all there is this one. If you don't eat it, you'll have nothing to eat. And then there's nothing left to go in the kli. But when you have a case where there is what to put into the vessel of the balabayit, you might have thought they would tell you, first put it in and then eat. In other words, don't eat until you put something in the vessel. When there's nothing to put in the vessel, so we let you. But when there's something to put in the vessel, perhaps you need to put something in the vessel before you're actually allowed to eat. Okay, so let's try the reverse. Let's say we had case 2. If you're picking a lot of things, you're allowed to first eat and then put it in the vessel. Well, you might have thought that's because you can eat first, because who cares whether you eat first or last? At the end, you're going to have lots of fruits to give to the balabayit in the end because you're going to fill the basket. It's not like you're working, on one fruit. You have a whole day's worth of work. But perhaps if they hired you to pick one grapefruit and that's all there is, you can't eat that one grapefruit because there'll be nothing left to put in the vessel of the owner. And remember, that's only when you can put in the vessel of the owner. That's when you have this obligation. So that's where you have this permissibility to eat the food. So sricha, that's why you needed both cases, because Rav Asi is saying, even in that case where there's nothing else to put in, we allow you to eat, because this idea, and this is a very interesting idea, and again, we're going to get to it even more today, about what's this concept of allowing you to eat on the job, right? Is it an ethical, that we can't have you do something and then prevent you from eating? So here, we're asking you to do something, but we can't prevent you from eating, so you could theoretically end up eating the whole thing. Third answer, we're back to our topic. Third answer of what's the difference between third and final answer, what's the difference between Tanakh and the rabbis in our Mishnah. One could say, maybe they disagree about the statement of Rav. One holds like him, one doesn't. What does Rav say? To Amarav, Matzati Megillat Starim Be Rabbi Chia. I found a secret hidden document in the house of Rabbi Chia. Why were there secret hidden documents in those days? Seems like the reason is because in those days, there was, right, Rashi even says this, Megillat Tmuna, okay, a hidden document. Lefisha Asur Lichtov Halachot. If you remember, the whole thing of the Mishnah was, we have to write the Mishnah because everyone's forgetting everything. But what happened before that? Now what? They weren't forgetting everything before? Of course they were forgetting things before. So what would people do? They would write things down even though you're not allowed to, and they would hide them because there was a concern if things were written, people might misconstrue, people might this. Obviously, you could argue the opposite, and that's why in the end, right, if it's all oral, you could also misconstrue. But also written has dangers. So they would write things. It's not that they'd write it all, and they would hide them. So he found this hidden document. You have to remember, Rav is living right in that Tkufat Ma'aval, like right after the Mishnah was written. So it makes sense that in the house of Rabbi Chia, who was same generation as Rabbi Yehuda and Nasi, who put together the Mishnah, and Rabbi Chia put together the Tosefta. There were finally books written, but it makes sense that, he had some books from before that someone might have, hidden. So I found this Megillat Starim, and it says in it, Katuv Ba, Isi ben Yehuda Omer, Ki tavo b'kerem re'echa, v'vi'at kol adam ha'katuv medaber. Isi said, you might remember, we read this pasuk in the beginning. It says, when you come into the vineyard of your friend, it never says a worker, right? And it says, don't put in your own vessel, but you can eat to your heart's content. Well, Isi ben Yehuda says, this is anybody. If anybody wants, they could come into your vineyard and eat. Okay, I can just walk next door to my friend's vineyard, take their grapes. Va'amar Rav says, what are you talking about? How could you possibly understand the pasuk that way? Lo shavak isi chaya l'chol b'riyah. He's not allowing anyone to survive. No, anyone, he doesn't mean the poor people, he means the landowners. No landowner is going to make it if anyone in the world could come in and pick fruits in their field. So how does this relate? Well, let's go back to our Mishnah. So now you'd have to say, okay, again, it's a little tricky. It's hard to read this into the Mishnah, but ochel poel kishut afilu b'dina. So the first opinion is, it's clearly a poel, a worker. A worker can eat anything they want, even up to a dinar, but not, right? He holds like Rav, only a worker, not anyone else. Then Rabbi Elazar Chasama says, can't eat any more, right? More than your salary. And the Chachamim allow this. Now, when it says the Chachamim allow this, why do they allow you to eat more than your salary? Well, the rabbis will say, because I hold like Isi ben Yehuda. I think anyone can eat. So if anyone can go into anyone's field and eat, then obviously the worker can eat more than their salary. And that's why they're matirim. Okay, again, you can't, it's not obvious that that's the difference and that's how it lines up, but one could claim that. So perhaps that's the machloket. Okay, so we now have three possibilities for what the machloket is. Either do we teach people not to do it anyway, though, even though, right, and worry about your future that no one will want to hire you, or we say, no, do what you want. Or is it, do we hold like Rabbi Asi? What about a case where there's only one thing you're picking? Tanakh says you can eat it anyway, and Chachamim say no, or perhaps the reverse. And do they hold like Rav or Isi ben Yehuda on this machloket? Is this something addressed to everybody, or is it just for a worker? But Rav Ashi says, Amarita l'shmate kamei to Rav Kahana. I told this to Rav Kahana, this machloket, Isi and Rav, and I suggested that perhaps you could answer Rav's question in the following way. Dilma ba'osin b'su'udatan da'abdu va'achlu. Maybe Isi ben Yehuda didn't mean, like when Rav says, what are you talking about, Isi? You're not allowing anyone to survive. Maybe he misunderstood Isi. Maybe Isi only meant people who come into people's fields and work to eat, okay? Meaning, there's two ways you could have a worker. You could hire workers to be your full-time workers, or people can just come into your field, say, I'm going to work in your field really with the motivation so that I can eat. But they're not really working for the sake of working. They're working in order to allow themselves to eat. Now, what's the problem with those kind of people now? So according to this, Isi Ben Yehuda has a point. Anyone can come into your field and work and eat. And it doesn't mean everyone can come into your field. And that would be a good retort to Rav. That's what he says. Okay, it's easy to understand this, and especially the continuation. If you think about what's going on now in Israel, where we have all these fields and they need workers, right? And they're bringing in all these volunteers. And there's a lot of issues with it, right? On the one hand, it's very nice. People volunteering, people are doing things. But there's a bunch of issues. First of all, they're not experienced workers, so they're not as effective, right? And here we're basically saying, so now we're going to say, no, still Rav could have a claim for the owner and say, this is still really bad for the owner. Why? People would much rather have hired workers who work in their field. And then it's not like everybody's coming into their fields and eating, because think about it, if a worker comes, okay, with a motivation, I'm going to eat. So a few things will happen. Number one, they'll come, they'll work, they'll eat. When they're full, they'll leave, right? If that's their whole motivation, and this happens with volunteers also. They don't have the stamina. It's different, but they don't have the stamina to stay all day. They're not like skilled workers who know how to do this, who do this all the time. And they're not motivated because they're not getting paid. So because of their lack of that motivation, right, they'll often come for 2-3 hours, which is helpful, but it's not really what a person wants. They'd rather fill the fields with workers who are going to work all day long and are experienced workers and aren't just doing it so that they could get food, right? But they know what they're doing. They'll be much more effective, much more efficient. And right, and that's one of the problems that happens now, is that people aren't so efficient. So they could work for 10 hours, maybe even they do work all day, but they're not going to do as much as the skilled workers will. So anyway, it's not the same thing, but there you can see the issues of person preferring, if they have the choice. Right now, people don't have the choice, and there aren't enough workers. But people have the choice. They'd much rather have the skilled workers that they hire and not people who just come for the food. Okay. Again, it's not a fair comparison. People are volunteering not because they want to eat on the job. That's definitely not what's going on here. But it is, you see the difference between that kind of worker and that kind of worker. Now we get to the question that's going to take us to the end of today's stuff. We're going to have 9 attempts to answer this question, 9 different sources. And it's a fascinating question. This heter, this permission for the worker to eat on the job, are they eating of their own? Now, what does that mean? It means when I sign up to work in agriculture, that there's conditions to my work. Okay, number 1, I get a salary. Number 2, I get to eat. Okay, which means that, okay, let's say you work in a bakery, so you can eat while you're in the bakery. Okay, can you take food home? Can you bring to your family? Right? What are the rights? Are the rights just for you or for other people? Right? People give discounts when you work in a store. You might get discounts in the store. Is the discount only for you, or can you give it to your family members and have them benefit from the discount? This is kind of like the question. Is it your own? Meaning it's part of the conditions of just like I could take my salary and I could give it to my family members or anyone I wanted to. So I could take the food that I'm allowed to eat. Let's say there's an assumption the average person eats X amount of food. So I can take some of that home if I'm not hungry on the job and I want to eat it later, or I want to give it to someone else. I can do that. Or Mishal Shamayim Huochem. Or is this a God-given gift? Okay, the Torah allows you to do this, but then it's not. Now, why does the Torah allow you to do this? I think I would word this differently. This is an ethical or moral issue here. We just like lo tachsom shor b'disho, and we said it's like torturing the animal to have the animal eat, right? You're working in a bakery and you can't eat anything. You're surrounded by chocolate and sweets and all that all day long. They won't let you touch anything. That would be, right, if you take an extreme example, right, of sweet and then people's, addiction to sweet, it would be unfair and immoral to not let you eat that. So we let you eat it. But that's a moral obligation of the owner to allow the person to eat, but not to take home to their family. That's a totally different issue. So, l'may nafka, what's the relevance? Well, as I already said, he says, listen, I don't want to eat on the job. I just want to bring it home. So if you say it belongs to you, the worker, so then of course you can decide to give it to anyone you want. It's yours. But The Torah didn't say your family can eat, you can bring it home. No, it's for you and that's it. What's the story? Tashma. So we're going to start bringing source after source after source. Most of the sources side on the side of Mishamayim, at least at first. Then we're going to reject them all anyway, and we're not going to have any conclusion. Tashma. Let's learn from here. Our Mishnah. Ochel poel kishut afilu b'dinar. Kotevet afilu b'dinar. Tanakama says you can eat more than your wages. If you say you're eating, right, it's part of your arrangement, your salary kind of thing. It's like an addition to your salary. Could it be that you're hired for a sixth of a zuz and you can eat a full zuz, right? 6 times the amount? That would be crazy. Elamai Michelle Farber. Okay, so now, and that, therefore, it must be, it's a gift, and therefore the gift could be, any amount of a gift. So even if it's 6 times the amount, it would fit. Gemara says, no, that's not a good proof because Elamai Michelle Farber. So you want to say it's a God-given gift, it's a moral obligation of the owner to let you eat. Still, you could ask the same question. It still doesn't make any sense, even if we view it as this moral obligation. There's a moral obligation to let you eat 6 times the amount of your salary. The only explanation you could say if you say it's Michelle Farber is Rahman Zakela. It's just that the Torah gave you this. In other words, it's some special dispensation, even if it's 6 times. Well, Hachanami, you could say the same thing. If it's Mishalo, if it's part of the deal, right, and it's really yours, you could still say, and 6 times works because Rahman Zakela, because the Torah said so. So that doesn't prove anything because either which way, it's kind of defies logic. So once it defies logic, it doesn't necessarily fall there or there. The second attempt is to suggest that our machloket in the Mishnah is a machloket, the same machloket as this question, that each one sides on a different side between Rabbi Elazar Chasama and the rabbis. Tashma, Rabbi Elazar Chasama Omer, Lo yochal poel yoter al scharo v'chachamim mitirin. So, right, you can't do more than your salary, you can do. My labaka miflage, is this not the root of the machloket? Mar savar mishalo ochel, mar savar mishal shamayim ochel. The rabbis who say you can eat as much as you want is because it comes from God, this gift. And the one, Rabbi Elazar, who says you can't, says because it's your salary and you can't eat more than your salary is worth. Right? It's like an addition to your salary. Lo, no, not necessarily. The whole machloka between them could be explained in a totally different way. It could be explained as how to read the word kinafshecha. And when we say kinafshecha, what do we mean? Remember it said you can eat, like, again, the loose way of translating it, to your heart's content, like your soul, okay, which we could translate loosely as, to your heart's content. What does that word mean? Kinafshecha means something you would put down your life for. Now, people do jobs, like let's say, imagine you pick fruits and you don't have this tall picker, but what do? You climb into the tree. Theoretically, we could say you basically give your life for your job because you're doing something that's theoretically dangerous. You could fall from the tree, but you're willing to do it for your job. So that's what they say, kinafshecha, like what you put your life on the line for, which means like your job, meaning only up till the amount of your job. That's what kinafshecha means. The word kinafshecha is a reference to your job because your job is something you moser nefesh for, give over your life for. So that means you can eat up until that amount of what you make. And that's Rabbi Elazar. But Marsaval, now we already know there's a different drasha on kinafshecha. Chachamim don't learn that because they use it for some other totally different drasha, which is manafshecha im chasanta patur, af poel im chasanta patur. If you remember, we learned you don't get lashes for not allowing your worker to eat, because if you yourself didn't work on the job, you wouldn't get lashes. So therefore, and that's the kinafshecha, the worker is like the owner. That's what it means, kinafshecha. He is like you, or she is like you. So therefore, it teaches you something totally different and not that. And that's what machloket has nothing to do with Mishalo or Michelle Shamayim. Third source, Tashma, Nazir Sha'amar, Tnu Ishto Banav. Now you have a Nazir who works in a field, who works in a vineyard. Nazir can't eat grapes, so it's a little unfair. I'm working, but I can't eat when I'm on the job, so maybe I could give it to my wife and children, or my husband and my children if I'm a woman. So Nazir Shamar Tnu L'ishto Banav and Shamin Lo, we don't allow the Nazir to do this. But if it all belongs to the Nazir, if it's part of the salary arrangement, why should he lose out? The Nazir should be allowed to transfer the food to the family members. They say there's a totally different reason. Hatan mishum lach hamrina or lech hamrina nazira skor lekamelo tiklaf. This is a classic line we say to the Nazir: stay away from vineyards. Okay, in this case, he happens to be working in a vineyard, but it means don't touch the grapes and go bring them home to your wife and children because you might eat them. So therefore, it's a boundary we make. Try not to go near vineyards and put yourself in a situation where you might accidentally eat something forbidden. Tashma, fourth source. This seems pretty clear. A worker who says, I want to give it to my wife and children, can't. Obviously, why can't? That's what we said was the big nafkamina between these two options. If he is allowed to eat this as part of his salary arrangement, why can't we listen to him and allow him to pass it on to someone else? To which they answer, my poel nazir. What do you mean? This poel, we're talking about a poel who's a nazir. That's why he can't give it to his family, as we saw before, because nazir shouldn't be handling the grapes. But then they say, v'hatanya nazir, v'hatanya poel. But wait, we have two braita. One says poel, one says nazir. If the one that says poel wanted to say nazir, would have worded it nazir. The fact that we have these two, and we're assuming they're kind of near each other, right? One says poel, one says nazir. Obviously, it said poel to distinguish it from a nazir, and it just means a regular worker. To which they say, that's not a good answer, because midiga be'adade tanyan, we know about Brightot, they came from all over the place, right? So this Brightot was from somewhere, and this Brightot was from somewhere else. And the fact that this one chooses, now, the Nazir is the Nazir who's a worker. Notice one said Nazir, one said Poel, but really it's a Nazir that's a Poel. So one chose Poel, one chose Nazir. It's not like these were next to each other and they said, okay, this one we're going to call a Nazir, this one we're going to call a worker to distinguish them. No, these were two totally different Brightot that came from who knows where. And therefore, you can't learn one from one to the other. And theoretically, you could say the poel is actually nazir, in which case, again, we have no answer to our question. Source 5, which is, again, just like the two previous, but with one minor difference, and this might be able to convince us we have an answer, although you already know we don't, so it won't. Tashma, the poel shamar tnu liishtiu lebanai shan ein shomin lo. How do we know that we don't listen? Here we add a pasuk, shenemar. Now, what would you expect if it's a nazir? Why not? Because leif lechamrin lenazir. That's not what it says. It says shene'amar el kalyecha lo titain, because it says don't put in your own vessels, and giving to your wife and your children is like putting in your own vessels. So this seems to be talking about a regular worker because it's not quoting anything about a nazir. It's specifically about a worker. If you want to say this is a nazir, that's not the reason why a nazir can't eat. It's not because you can't put in your own vessels. The reason nazir can't eat is because mishum leich lechamrina nazirahu. It's a totally different reason. So you can't say there's a nazir. So Gemara says you can. In Achinami, you could say it's a nazir. Why did it quote this pasuk then? Well, since they said we're talking about a nazir who's a worker, and we use the language worker, they wanted to connect it with some verse that had to do with workers. They connected it to the verse not because that's the reason. It was what we call an asmachta. There's some sort of reference in the pasuk. Don't bring them home, right? So we'll use that here, even though the real reason is because we want to have the nazir avoid grapes. It's not the most convincing answer, but it's a way to reject this and say it's not conclusive anyway. Right? Remember, all we're trying to say is these sources aren't conclusive. It's possible they're saying what we think they're saying, but it's not conclusive. I want to point out so far that all we've done so far is bring sources either that say it's mishamayim, okay, and the last three were really all in one and the same kind of idea, or the second one, which said it's a machloket between, right, the two Tanaim, basically. But in the end, we reject all these anyway. Sixth source, Tashma. Now moving to Amud Bet. You hire someone to dry figs. Okay, now, why lektzot? Ktzot comes from muktzah. The muktzah is the place where they would dry them on the roof. Remember, that's what we learned muktzah comes from, because muktzah means something that has no use. While you're drying the figs, they're totally useless. It's nothing to do with that. Anyway, that's just as an aside, but you hire this worker to dry your figs. Now, figs, when they're collected before you dry them, it's called gemar malacha because they're ready to be eaten raw. But if you're planning to dry them, then they're not ready at all. So if your intent is to dry them, the gemar malacha doesn't happen when you collect them before you dry them. The gemar malacha happens later once they're dried, in which case, while you're drying them, putting them out to dry, you're allowed to eat because Again, Gemar Malacha means once we're finalized, right, and it's obligated Maaser, you can't eat it anymore. And if you were going to eat, you'd have to take Maaser on it. If you make an arrangement with the owner, this is different. This isn't what the halacha says. This is what if you make a special arrangement and you say, listen, not only am I going to eat, but you're going to let my son eat with me, or my son's going to eat instead of me. Hu ochelu patur, so when he wants to, he can eat. Beno ochel v'chayat, but if the son eats it, the son is obligated in maaser. The son can eat because they made an arrangement and the owner agreed, but the son would have to take maaser because for the son already, it's gemar malacha. Now think about it. Why is it gemar malacha? Because it was already, they're eating them not dry, they're eating them raw, fresh. So fresh, it was ready already, it was in the pile, it was all ready. So the son is like someone who purchases them. As the worker is working with, these are going to be dried and I'm just eating on the job. The son is coming from a totally different obligation, and it's kind of like he purchased it. Now, someone who purchases the fresh fruit, it's already gemar malacha because they bought the finished product. So therefore, the son would have to take maaser. So what does this help us? Well, again, we're going to try to prove it's mishamayim, because if it's the person's own, right, it belongs to the worker as part of their salary arrangement, then their son should be able to eat on account of them, which means it should be just the same as the owner. Sorry, it's the worker. So I'm a Ravina, no. That's not the reason here why the son, really you could say, Mishalo, it really belongs to the worker, and really the worker could pass it on to the son. But there's an issue here because there was an arrangement made that you can give it to the son, it's mechse kemekach. It looks like a sale. And once it looks like a sale, then we're going to actually obligate you a maaser once the son kind of, so to speak, purchases it. And it's for a totally different reason and doesn't have to do with our topic. Seventh source. And this is now, we're now going to quote 7th, 8th, and 9th are going to be all coming from the next Mishnah at the top of Tzadi Gimel Amud Aleph. Okay, so it'll help us for tomorrow. Tashma. And by the way, the first two sources, we're going to try to prove the opposite finally, that mishalo, okay, from your own. That's part of your arrangement. You have a field that's in the 4th year of the fruit trees growing. Okay, the first 3 years it's orless, forbidden to eat. The 4th year you have to bring it to Jerusalem, like Maser Sheni. You have to bring all the produce to Jerusalem or redeem it. Well, you hire me to work in your field. Now, you didn't, well, we'll see. There's either you told me beforehand it was neta revai, or you didn't tell me. Now, I can't eat neta revai because it can only be eaten in Jerusalem. I can't eat on the job. So, hare elu lo yochlu. Okay, if you hire me to do neta revai, I can't eat because it's forbidden for me to eat. But if you didn't tell me beforehand that your field was neta revai, you just hired me to work in your field, and I assumed I was going to eat on the job, and I get to work and I find out I can't eat anything, podeh umachilan. You have to redeem those fruits and give me the value of that, right? And give me other fruits to eat. It's not fair. If we just say this is a gift that the Torah gifted to me that I can eat on the job, why do we force the employer to sell, right, to redeem and give me other food? This food is asur. The Torah wouldn't give me a gift of something that's forbidden, so I have no rights to it, basically, because it's forbidden anyway. And if the Torah gifted me and gave me this right to eat, well, no one can eat it, so I can't eat it either. So why should we require you to do it? Require you to do it seems to be because I have rights to that land, not as a moral obligation that you have to me, but it's part of our salary arrangement, and you tricked me into thinking that I was going to get that, and therefore you have to pay me. So the answer, no. It's just because this looks like an unfair deal. It looks like it was a mistaken deal because I came thinking one thing. You, turns out, were giving me something else. And that looks like this was an unfair, right, where you duped me into something. And that's why we force you to do it. But that could be whether it's Mishalo or whether it's Mishamayim, it doesn't really matter. 8th source, and this is again the continuation of that Mishnah, Ema Seifa, Nit Parsu Igulav, Nit Patchu Chaviotav, Hare Elu Lo Yochlu. If you remember, we have a window of when I can eat. It's until Gmar, it's from when they're ripe until it's completed, and meaning it's obligated in Maser. What if we have these igulei dvela, we've learned about them before, pressed fig cakes, but they opened up, they got unstuck to each other, okay? One of the jobs is to press the fig cakes. Once it's pressed, it's obligated Maser. If it was pressed, obligated maaser, and then it got unpressed, okay, they got unstuck to each other, and you were hired to stick them together, it's already past gmar malacha, so you're not really allowed to eat on the job. And that's why it says, Hare elu lo yochlu. And nitpatchu chaviyotav. You had sealed barrels, they got unsealed, and you hire someone to seal them up again. Again, the wine is already ready, it's in the barrel, it's already gmar malacha. We're going to get to in a bit what is gmar malacha for wine, but it's gmar malacha basically. So at this point, right, I can't eat because it's too late. V'i lo hodiam. But again, if you didn't tell me that this was the situation, well, ma'asero ma'achilan, then you have to, just like in the previous one, you have to fix it. You have to tithe your produce and then let me eat it because you duped me again. V'i amar Michelle Shamayim hochel amay ma'asero ma'achilan. So this is going to be the same as the other, though. We're not going to focus yet on the duping. We're going to say, it sounds like you have an obligation to give me food. So if we say Michelle Shamayim amay ma'asero ma'achilan, yisur lo zaki lo rachmana, same thing as before. If we're going to say it's your moral obligation, and it's really a gift from God. Well, the gift from God is only going to be on things that are permitted. This is out of the realm of what's permitted, so it shouldn't matter, right? You shouldn't have to do anything. Well, now, okay, so let's try to say what we said in the last one. No, it's because you tried to dupe me, and it looks like there was an unfair miscommunication here. You purposely made me believe that I was coming to work to get and also be able to eat on the job. And I get there and I find out not. But you can't say that here. Why? Well, it depends which case. Okay? So we're going to see that one of the cases here, when I'm hired for the job, I know already it's past gmar malacha. That's going to be the wine. Because you hired me to seal your barrels. Everybody knows that once it's in the barrel, it's already gmar malacha. So I knew that I was coming into this job and I wasn't going to eat on the job because it's already too late. So let's see. If you're going to say that, well, now, if you come and hire me to press figs, you didn't tell me that they were already pressed and got unstuck to each other and you want me to stick them back together. You just hired me to press your figs. So it could have been that was before gmar malacha, because it could have been, and that was the mistake that, you tricked me into thinking that. And that's why that could make sense. And then again, this has nothing to do with our topic. But I knew when I was coming to seal your barrels. That's obviously past the time of gmar malacha. I knew I wasn't going to be able to drink any wine, so I can't complain. So in which case, we can't explain that we're back to saying it must be Michelle Shamayim. I'm sorry, it must be Michelle. The fact that you have to take the maaser and give it to me must be because it's my right, okay? And therefore, it's Michelle. But no, we're going to explain how you could have also tricked me into thinking that I could eat it, drink it. Amar Rav Sheshet, shenitpatchu chaviotav lebor. Rav Sheshet says the cases where the barrels opened up and they fell back into the bore where all the wine is. And basically you hire me to collect the wine and seal it. So then, now again, if it already went in the bore, if it already was in the barrel, then it already had gmar malacha. But if it, and then fell back in. But I didn't know that when you hired me because you just hired me to seal the barrel, to take it out of the pit and seal it. So I thought it was the first time. It hadn't, right? Just like the figs. And that's a good explanation. To which they say, wait a minute. But when is gmar malacha actually? We haven't really discussed it. We just assumed once it's in the barrel, it's gmar malacha. And when it's in the pit, it's not. But that's not true. It says in a Braita that as soon as it goes into the pit, it's already gmar malacha. So if you're supposed to take it out of the pit, well, it's already done and it's already chayv maser, and you knew that in the beginning, so there can't be any mekach ta'ud here. And then we're back to square one, thinking this teaches Mishalah. Well, the answer, Kisha Rabbi Akiva, Damar Misha Yekapeh. We could say that this source goes like Rabbi Akiva, who says it's not then, it's later. It's when it's in the pit and you take off all the dregs and the pits and all that. Da'amrele lo havi yadina. Because I could say, you hired me to do this. I didn't know that you had already taken the dregs off. I thought it wasn't chayv maser yet, and I thought I'd be able to eat. F'neimale, but wait, still, you have a claim against me, because again, it's always you have to prove it. You say to me, if I hired you to take it out of the bore, there's two possibilities. Either I already took off all the dregs and the pits, or I didn't. But you should have known there was a possibility that that was already done, in which case It's not my fault. I didn't dupe you into anything. You should have realized it was a possibility. To which they answer, it must be talking about, and this is going to be final, and then we'll have an explanation here. It must be a case where whenever they hire someone to take stuff out of the pit, they're also the ones who take off the dregs and the pits. And that's why the person has a claim, the worker can say, you have to maaser and do this for me because this is a mekachto, because you tricked me. Because I thought, since you hired me to do this, I thought this was the first time it was in the pit. I didn't realize that it was already had been in the pit. It was in a barrel and then it fell back in. And that. Okay. Next option. V'hashta detane Rav Zvi b'dbei Rav Hoshaya yaim m'shirei labor v'yikapeh for Rabbi Akiva omer mishiach shleba chaviyot. So now we're going to have a different version of this bright and the machloket about when Gemar Malacha is. And according to this version, we're going to propose a different answer. So if you say, like Rav Zvid says, which his source said, according to Tana Kama, it's actually what we had Rabbi Akiva saying. It's when you take off the dregs. And Rabbi Akiva says, Mishiach shaleba chaviyot. Akiva says it's when you take off all the scum off the top, once it's in the barrel. Okay, so not in the pit. In the pit, there's the dregs and the pits, and you take those off. Once it goes into the barrel, like think about when you pour soda into a thing and all the fizz comes up, and sometimes there's some scum left at the top. Okay, maybe not in soda because it's clear, but in wine, there'll be some scum left at the top. That has to be cleared in the barrel. Until that point, Rabbi Akiva doesn't think there's Gemar Malacha. So according to this, now we have a better answer. You don't have to say it got dumped back in. You hired me to seal your barrel. And I say, and it turns out you had already taken the scum off. But I say, I didn't know that you had taken the scum off. I thought you were hiring me to take the scum off also, and it's unfair. Now I get to eat, and then you'd have to do that. And then wouldn't have to be this crazy example where somehow from the barrel it fell back into the pit. It's a little bit of a weird answer. To which they say, same thing as before though. You could claim to me, I don't know you anything. You should have at least, right, 50-50 chance. Either you're sealing it with the scum having been cleaned off already, or I hired you to take off the scum and seal it. So you can't blame me, you say. Well, no, there must be a place where normally whoever's hired to seal also removes the scum. In this case, you had done it already, or someone else had done it, in which case it was already chayav b'maser, and that's why we required you to take off the maser. And again, this in the end doesn't give us an answer to our question because the reason is something else entirely. Okay, which is mekach ta'ut, right? It looks like you had duped me into something. And misled me would be a good way of saying it. Ninth source, Tashma. Also the continuation of this Mishnah. Kotzetz adam al yidei atzmo va'al yidei bito beno bito agdolim va'al yidei avdo v'shulchato agdolim va'al yidei ishto mipnei sheyesh behem dat. I can make an arrangement that instead of taking $100 of salary plus eating, let's just give an amount to what I probably eat. Let's say $20. And I want you to pay me $120. Or my son is working for you, my daughter, my slave, my wife, or my husband, in our case. So someone else, I can make an arrangement for them that instead of them eating, okay, why is that? As long as they're gedolim, it works because yesh behem dat, because they have knowledge, meaning they can say, I'm okay not to eat and I'd rather get the money. I can't do it for my minor children, for my minor slaves, or for my animal, because my animal doesn't have dat, neither do they have dat. And you can't say, oh, they don't care about eating because we don't know what they do. They don't have their own knowledge to be able to say, I don't care about eating. I'd rather have the money. So you can't do that. Now, what does that have to do with anything? We assume, what does it mean, ketanim? It means that you're, or your gedolim, or any of these people, they're all eating at your table. They're financially dependent on you. So now what? If you say, it comes from a God-given gift, that's why you can't make this arrangement for the children. If you say, it's mine, now my children working means the money's mine because my money, their money is my money. So that means theoretically, I should be able to make an arrangement for children because theoretically it's my money. So I can say, I'm mochel on the food, the food is really mine, I can take it away from the children and I can basically say I want money instead. So if that's the situation, then this would prove that it's definite, right? It's Mishalo. To which they say, all right, I'm sorry. Sorry, it's Michelle Shamayim. If it was Mishalo, right? I should be able to do the mechila for my children. So now they say no. It must be when you're not giving them food, meaning they're independent, financially independent. And that's why I can't make an arrangement for my children. Now, the Gemara says, well, if they're not financially dependent on me, how on earth can I make an arrangement for my big children, right? If they're not dependent on me and they have their own bank account, right? Who am I to make an arrangement on their behalf? So then if they're not financially dependent, then I can't decide for the Gedolim. So they say, no, because Gedolim yadeh b'kamach. Because the Gedolim understand that I'm making this arrangement for them. I'm kind of just helping them out, right? We sometimes do things for older children. They're busy. They ask us to take care of things for them. I can take care of this arrangement for them, and they agree to it. V'hatani Rabbi Yoshaya. But wait, Rabbi Yoshaya has this brighter. Kotzetz adam yidetzmo v'yidei shto, avalo yidei behemto, v'lo yidei b'no ubito agdolim. Notice what this, sorry. V'yidei b'no ubito agdolim, avalo yidei b'no ubito aktanim. Okay, so far that matches exactly. You can make an arrangement for yourself, for your wife, not for your animal. It's just a different order. Yes, for your older children, not for your younger children. So far, so good. But kotzetz al yidei avdo v'shkato aknanim, being dolim, being ktanim. But when it comes to avadim ktanim, it's whether they're dolim, whether they're ktanim. Now, in order to resolve the contradiction between this source and the other source, maybe we could get to an answer. My love, idib ma'alelahem mizonot. Maybe both are cases where they're all financially dependent on you. Ubahaka mitlage, and the machlok between both those, our Mishnah and the Braita, is mar savar mishalahu ochel, umar savar mishal shamayim hu ochel. Okay, so now we're going to say, the one who says that the children, right, the older ones, you can make an arrangement for them, it's because it's mine. So I can make an arrangement for the older ones. And the ones who say you can't make an arrangement, not for the older, not for the minors, is saying because it's Mishal Shamayim. To which they say, no, you can't necessarily say that. And then we'd have an answer that our Mishnah holds, right, on one side of that argument. No, Tekule Alma Mishalohu Chavalo Kasha. We could say very simply, that's not the machloket. Everyone thinks it's mishalo, that it's mine, and therefore I can make arrangements. But if I'm not ma'alele mizonot, right? If they're not financially dependent on me, then I can't make this arrangement for them, right? But the Braita is ma'alele mizonot. If it's ma'alele, if b'she'em ma'alele mizonot, 1 second. Then if I'm not ma'alele mizonot, then the Mishnah says, I can make an arrangement for the Gedolim, but I can't make an arrangement for the Ketanim. And the one that says the Braita is talking about Shivchato Ketanim, Ben Gedolim, Ben Ketanim. I can make an arrangement. Why can I make an arrangement? Is because I'm ma'alele mizonot. They're dependent on me. That's why I can make an arrangement even for Gedolim. Even for Ketanim. Right? When I can't make an arrangement for Ketanim, it's because they're not dependent on me. But I can if they are dependent on me. So now they say, wait, that's a problem. Because so wait, you're saying the Braita is ma'alele mizonot? If I'm basically giving them food and they're dependent on me, then I should be able to do even for the Ketanim. So why does it tell me I can't do for the Ketanim? To which they say, there's a fascinating line to end with, something to think about. If we talk about the whole moral issue here, which is what we talked about, maybe it's morally improper for someone not to allow their worker to eat. The Torah doesn't allow you to torture your own children. Okay, so if it's a gadol, they can make a decision on their own, right? They could say, I'm okay with it, right? Like they're financially dependent on you. You decide I'm going to do this, and they say, okay, fine, no problem. But if they're minors, you can't decide for them. You can't say, I'm gonna make you, I'd rather take the money and let you not eat on the job. You have no right to do that if they can't agree, and they can't agree because they're minors. And that's because, right, you're not allowed to torture them. Very interesting way to end. So I left with our sugya. Basically, we started with these 3 differences. What's the difference between Tana and Chachamim about the machloket, about can you do more than your salary? And they both seem to say yes. What's the difference between them? 3 options. And then we had this big question, is the whole allowing you to eat, is it because it's Mishal Shamayim, it's a gift given from God, like a moral obligation, we could call it, or is it because it's part of like an arrangement of work? You do this and you get that. And then it's yours and you can do with it what you want. You can give it to anyone you want. And we brought 9 sources to try to get to an answer, but every single source we ended up explaining in some other, again, each one was a possible other way of reading it, and therefore we don't have any conclusions about what the answer is to this very interesting question. With that, we'll finish for today. Wishing everybody a good day and B'Sarot Tovot.